So the concept of unending conscious torment in hell raises a moral dilemma that creates a bit of cognitive dissonance in our minds. To cope, we either ignore the tension or we seek some form of justification. And if you deny feeling this dissonance, I think you're either willfully ignorant, intellectually dishonest, or perhaps it unearths something dark inside of you. And I'm not saying if you believe in unending conscious torment that there is something dark inside of you, but if you reject the idea that there's a moral dilemma, that perhaps tells me something else about you. Because many theologians who affirm the doctrine of unending conscious torment have expressed deep emotional and intellectual struggles with its implications. C.S. Lewis, though not a theologian by profession, his theological writings have significantly influenced Christian thought. In The Problem of Pain, he acknowledges the difficulty of reconciling the doctrine of hell with the concept of divine goodness. And he writes, "There is no doctrine which I would more willingly remove from Christianity than this, if it lay in my power." And then, as we've already spoken about Augustine of Hippo, who is a foundational figure in Western Christianity, who also upheld the belief of unending conscious torment, he admitted to the emotional burden that it carries. It is a matter of the greatest sorrow that so many people will be condemned to eternal punishment. Jonathan Edwards, another prominent and influential preacher and theologian that came about during the Great Awakening, is known for his vivid depictions of hell. Despite his firm belief in eternal conscious torment, he does recognize the distressing nature of the doctrine. This doctrine is indeed awful and dreadful, yet it 'tis God's. My point is that no loving and sane person is just okay with the concept of billions of people being consciously tormented for all of eternity while we live in paradise. If eternal conscious torment is true, this should at the very least put some sorrow in our hearts, and we should carry weight of this burden. And as we just read, many influential theologians throughout the church history felt that this concept of hell is dreadful, and they wish that they could wipe it from existence. Because somewhere in our feeble minds, we must think it's reprehensible. Yet we don't seem to think that it would be equally reprehensible to God. So we find justifications for it. But why? Well, because the Bible says. But does it? And you may also say, as I've heard this argument, that, well, when we get to heaven and Jesus wipes away the tears, we're going to view the unbeliever, the unrighteous, as enemy. It doesn't matter if it's family members, it doesn't matter loved ones, whatever, we're going to view them as enemy, therefore we'll be okay with that. But even that argument feels weird, because who among us would be okay with the torment and torture of even someone that we can't stand, even someone that we think is vile? I would argue that if we were presented with watching one of our enemies be put to death by being lit on fire, we couldn't stomach it. We would not want to watch them suffer for 5 minutes while they die, let alone an unending duration of torment and torture in flames. In The Inescapable Love of God, Thomas Talbot addresses this moral conundrum concerning an all-powerful God, an all-good God, and the existence of hell. He presents this trilemma involving 3 propositions that many traditional Christians believe are biblically based, but he considers that they all 3 cannot be simultaneously true. Proposition 1 says God is all-loving. Proposition 2 says God is all-powerful. And Proposition 3 states that hell is eternal and conscious damnation. Talbot argues that one must reject at least one of these propositions to maintain logical consistency, because all 3 cannot be true. For if God wills that all people be saved, and he has the power to accomplish it, then it follows that all eventually will be reconciled to God. However, if some are eternally damned, then either A, God does not will the salvation of all, denying that he is all good, or B, God is unable to save everyone, denying that he is all powerful. And Talbot challenges the doctrine of eternal damnation by advocating for universal reconciliation. So since we can't make all 3 of these propositions come into perfect harmony, we have to make justifications to help satiate dissonance that exists in our minds. The Arminian states that hell is unending and that God is all-loving. So to be able to assert that God is also all-powerful, they state that God doesn't force salvation on anyone because love requires freedom. So some will freely choose to reject God, and therefore they get eternal separation from God. And the Calvinists would state that hell is also unending, but that God is all-powerful. So to harmonize those 2 propositions with an all-loving God, they will state that God does not will the salvation of all people in the same way. He wills the elect to be saved, while others will face judgment, which reflects his justice. And these answers may work for you, but they've never worked for me. And And I think probably I had reasoned that hell really was only reserved for like the worst of the worst, the Hitler types. But even then, you can't think too hard about hell. If hell was just Hitler, through the course of eternity, he would have paid for the sins of all of mankind an infinite amount of times. So I don't see how there is justice in that punishment, that a finite being would pay an infinite punishment for sins committed in this earth. I think ultimately we have to make a decision on what is the character of God. And while we're on the topic of God's character,